Okay.
Good afternoon, good evening, and to some good morning. Welcome to the C47's channel and another episode of Camera Flask. The episode number is often disputed, but the co-hosts are not. I am here with the lovely Ben Barden and the awesome golden boy, Caleb Pike. Gentlemen, it is a pleasure to have you here today on this Wednesday, along with the people who are joining us here live in the chat and to the people who are going to be watching the show on replay. How are you doing today?
Good. All well.
Well, yes, likewise. How about yourself, Mr. Jem?
Schofield? I'm doing fine. Yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm prepping for an actual production, and it is a 3-day stills shoot with my wife. So we are going to be doing starting tomorrow morning, very early, a photography job, which is going to be shot in natural light, off-camera flash / speed lights, and also strobes. 26 different locations over a 3-day period, and I've just finished prepping all the equipment for that. So I'm excited, and here I am, ready to talk about maybe cameras, possibly, today. Ben, what have you been up to, sir, besides hanging out somewhere with your mates?
Yeah, so that was this evening, which has been very nice. But I actually did my first decent-sized production on Sunday, which was great. And then we got a little COVID scare at the end of it, which just rattled us all, but was all fine. Yeah, it's one of the crew thought they might have had it, haven't. Everything's all cool. But yeah, really nice to have done a proper job with crew again. It felt amazing after all this time to be back doing proper work. Yeah, so that's been my last week. And I lost my glasses. A tractor drove over my glasses.
Unbelievable.
So I have to go and sort that out tomorrow.
Unbelievable. You look great, though. You look fantastic.
Thank you. So do you without my glasses.
And Caleb, how are you? What you been doing this week? Everything going all right over there?
Yeah, finishing up a guide for the A64, 65, and 6600 cameras. Mm-hmm. We're adding some space to our current location.
Great.
So just some paint and things there. And haven't done really any videos in several weeks due to that and the noise and everything. So
yeah, that will
break.
Change though.
Also, kind of always wondering what YouTube's going to look like when you come back after being gone for a while.
Yeah.
So,
well, at least you have Camera Flask. And to answer a quick question from the chat, we're shooting with the Fujifilm X-T4 with Fujifilm native lenses, mainly primes, but we will have the 16 to 80 f4 and the 18 to 55 just on standby if we want to shoot any little video things. And then we are also shooting with the 5D Mark III, also with native lenses, so all Canon glass, and that'll be the 20mm prime, that'll be the 17 to 40, not my favorite, but it's what we have. I like the 16 to 35 more, and then the 24 to 105 and 70 to 200. And whoa, what's happening, kiddos? He comes in early from Europa. It's the shiz. Can I say it's the shiz? I think pair character. And what's he doing today? He's stretching his arm forward to offer a cup of coffee. Oh, it's amazing. I love it. Thank you for your support, and thank you for being part of the channel always, and for coming to some of the happy half hours. Gentlemen, let's do the rounds here. We got to get some drinks in hands before we get this conversation going between us and the chat, which we hope is going to be exploding today. Mr. Caleb Pike, what's left in the bottle? Let's see it. Dun dun dun. I don't know about your audio. You're very silent.
Wow.
Oops, sorry about that.
Yeah, having a little beer. Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Slightly,
is that the Negro Modelo?
It is.
Modelo. Yeah. Okay. Very
and,
nice.
Saw it on the shelf at the supermarket, and I was like, "That looks nice. Let's do it."
That's good. We're gonna go to a swimming hole after the show and have a picnic, and I think I'm gonna drink beer there. So that's good. Ben, what are you having to drink, or what are you continuing to have as drinks tonight? Because we know this is not your first drink.
This is not my first drink tonight. I have been out with friends. I have just got back, so I'm going to try and be as quiet as possible and not embarrass myself. However, I'm going to carry on with drinking beer tonight. This is Krakenosh, which is a fairly local brew. It's got a very short shelf life of around, I don't know what that says on it, that's the 13th of August. So it doesn't last very long, but it tastes amazing. It's non-filtered, non-pasteurized, and it's generally great and incredibly cheap. This stuff's like 50 cents a bottle.
Beautiful.
50 cents?
50 cents. Ducats.
No way.
Yeah.
I need to move out there.
It's a half a ducat.
Delicious.
It's a half a ducat a bottle.
Honestly, it is 50 cents a bottle.
All right, let's move on. I'll do mine quickly. I'm just having an old standby. It's a Tomatin right there. There it is. It's a double cask, 12-year. The AF. I moved the box. If only I had an A7S III, we wouldn't have this problem. I'm just kidding. Or an R5 or R6. AF systems on theirs are going to be better all across the boards. So here we are. Let's do a cheers. And somebody's having a fireball. I think that was Small Brown Fox. And to everybody in the chat, welcome. And let's get some chat going here. What do we have? Let's say some shout outs to after a sip.
That's 30.
Cheers.
Come on. Come on, Frosty Flake. I love these names. They're amazing. We got Eli, Sam, Andres, Shiz, of course, coming in with that super chat. And then who else is here today? We've got Bill hanging out.
DVE store.
Yeah, we love DVE store. Pat, and if you're in the U.S. in general, check out dvestore.com. It's not only a great reseller, but Guy Cochran, who runs it, is more than a stand-up person. He's a really great human being, and if you can support smaller business as well, then it's great. My A10 Mini, my A10 Mini Pro, both came from DVE Store, my Decimator, and I will continue that trend for equipment. Not all my equipment, but definitely some key buys from DVE Store. So there's the plug. They're not sponsoring, but they might as well be, because, I mean, there you go. Okay. All right, let's get settled here as the drinks keep coming through. By the way, if you're new to the channel and you showed up because it said A7S III, maybe subscribe. We talk geeky stuff here. It's about tech, it's about craft, and if you like that kind of stuff and you like the nuts and bolts, it's not sexy here, but you know, we get it done. That doesn't sound right, but it's okay. And I'm looking at Ben, watch yourself, and a little camera that never was going to be. Now, I just have one thing to say. Everybody keeps saying on their YouTube reviews, we've been waiting for 5 years for this camera to arrive. Did the A7S II come out 5 years ago? It did not, right? It's not 5 years ago that the A7S II came out. It's not been 5 years.
I don't know. I'm going to have to look that up.
Okay, I don't think so. And if that's not the case, then stop saying you've been waiting for 5 years. We've been waiting for a long time for the next A7S series camera to come out. But if it did come out 5 years ago, then I stand corrected. But I'm just...
September 2015.
Okay, we've been waiting for...
The thing is, it came out 5 years ago, but it's not like it was released and announced, and then we were immediately like, but what about Mark III? You know,
that's true.
It's more
so
like
we haven't been waiting.
It came out.
But I'm very surprised it's been
safe.
Yes, but I'm surprised that it's been almost 5 years since that camera came to market or was announced. That is actually surprising.
We're on Mark IVs for everything else, pretty much.
Yeah, that's true. When was the A7 III announced?
Mark IV. Like 2 years ago, 2018, I think.
Jeez, it's amazing.
So this camera is way overdue. For Sony, again, this is Sony we're talking about, not Canon. Sony that pulls a camera out of their bottom every 6 months.
And blitzes everybody. So it has been odd. We've all been saying, what have they got to do? What have they got to do to keep up? And what have they done is pretty exceptional, really, I would say.
All right. Well, with that, let's start talking about this camera and initial reactions. And we're going to bring the chat into this as well. So I want us to all eyes on the chat, and we're just going to kind of go for it. So let's start with you, Caleb, because you know, Team Panasonic, that was Team Canon there for a while, and then
For a week.
tell me what's going on. Well, talk to me about yesterday, July 28th, and what happened with you, and let's start there.
So I had pre-ordered the R5 and the R6. Was super excited to get back into Team Red, and then as people started releasing more content about the cameras, the overheating, I was concerned about it, but not as concerned because I don't do a lot of outdoor stuff. But it's definitely hard to recommend something that is that expensive that performs so poorly, even at like 4K. And then the A7S was announced. I started watching the premiere or the actual Sony video, the live stream or whatever, and was like, oh, geez, this is going to be an hour of fluff. And then I got a notification, and apparently Sony went out and dropped this camera in a lot of people's laps, one of whom was Gerald Undone. So I just watched his video. I just completely shut off the Sony and watched his because it was super in depth. And then I was sold. So I was going to probably pre-order it, but I purchase all my cameras, so it's really really hard to do that. When this much expensive stuff comes out at once, it also starts to stack up pretty quickly. So I decided to can the R5 because I can always rent it, and the A7S is looking really solid, and it checked all the boxes for me for stuff I wanted. I don't think it went like super nutso crazy. I think Sony did exactly what they needed to, and that's about it. So the big ones for me, of course, is 10-bit, higher data rate, 10-bit 422 internal, and then the color science tweak. Because everything, like this camera I'm using right now, love it. The only thing, and it's a huge thing and a kind of a deal breaker, is the 8-bit 420 low data rate. Just brutal.
With the questionable color science.
Yeah, but even with that, like, it's not too bad. It's just it's so thin to work with. So I found a couple workarounds that I can get by. Sure, it's no Canon or Fuji or anything like that, but it's so thin you can't touch it without stuff falling apart.
And Ben, initial reaction, being somebody who is not. I mean, you historically have been a Sony shooter at times, but did you ever invest in Sony mirrorless at all?
Yes, I had A7, the original A7S and the A7R II, which was an amazing camera. But I never went down their lens route. I always stuck with Canon. I stuck with their lenses, did the adapt thing, which worked kind of all right for video, was pretty terrible for stills, and then went back to Canon, loved that, and with the announcement, I'm so pissed off. I'm so annoyed about this camera being so good. I feel all kinds of disappointed. I'm so annoyed with Canon. I'm more annoyed with Canon than I am about Sony. I think Sony have really just blitzed it. It's amazing. I'm so pissed off that Canon have cocked their cameras up so much with this overheating thing. I was so amazed when I saw Johnny from Cinema 5D's review of it this week, and just kind of being gobsmacked at how bad it was in terms of this overheating thing and it being just unusable. That's what it seems. I don't know what Canon can do to rectify this whole thing. I don't know if it's a complete product recall. There was some rumor sites were talking about that they patented some kind of adapter that was for EF lenses, which had some kind of cooling system in it to pull heat away from the sensor. But I mean, this is all awful. Even having to use that, it's just terrible.
We have to address the adapter because a lot of people are brought that up as a defense of Canon. But this is,
Yeah.
we're talking about Canon, someone who
Right.
the only reason they did mirrorless is because they figured out a way to protect the sensor with like a shutter, you know, like they're really intense about making something that lasts forever. And for something like
Right.
that to slip through, and it's no accident. They clearly explored all the options, and this was the best it was going to be for this processor and these cameras. So even though they're marketing them as video cameras, they're clearly still, they don't care enough about video. They're still going to be mainly still shooter cameras.
So I think that's a good segue. I mean, I think that I'm definitely not going to play devil's advocate and say that these issues don't exist, because they do exist. We have to find out when production models get into everybody's hands, if this is just as bad as everybody says it is. And we're going to really have to see. And I think I'm going to get an R5 and an R6 in to create some content, so I'll be able to put them through their paces as well to see that. I think one of the things that sort of talks to what you're saying, Caleb, is first and foremost we have to differentiate the fact that even though first of all, the Sony event was really creepy with the AI guy, just reading off of a PowerPoint or a keynote. That just like tripped me out a little bit. But if you really look at the R5 and you look at that camera and you look at that 45 megapixel sensor, very much so you have to look at that camera, and not defending the camera, but you have to look at that camera as a camera that was designed as a hybrid camera system, right? So, and it's going to be, for a lot of people who are still photographers, they're not going to have any issues with that camera, okay? But for the video market, and they're very clearly pushing those video features in the camera system, there are going to be issues for people who are trying to use that. And they've given us so many options inside of the camera system. It's almost, the question is, should they have just foregone this fine HQ mode and just said, we're going to go with the standard? Should they not have done that? And then we look at the A7S III, and there's no question based on the megapixels of the camera system that this camera was designed by Sony for people to use it at almost 100% of the time as a video-based capturing device, right? So it doesn't mean that you can't take nice still photographs, 12 megapixel, still photographs, but there is some difference between those two camera systems, and to a certain degree the R6, but probably less so, in terms of that, because the megapixels are closer. So we need to, say that there could still be a great market for Canon when it comes to the R5 for people who are predominantly still shooters.
I don't think so.
Shaking your head. Okay, go ahead.
But what's the R5 giving you over, say, the R for that enormous jump in price? I'm not sure that there's a huge thing. There's not an awful lot there from the stills photographer. All the glitzy stuff from that camera, that's video spec stuff. And that was very much the way they've been going after it. I agree, it's still a good stills camera, and if you're using it, but I don't think you're going to warrant paying that amount more over an R, or you're going to go, or if you're really predominantly stills, you're going to go down the 1D line. I just think they've dropped a bollock enormously with it. I can't see the justification for any of this overheating nonsense. It's insane. I honestly can't believe that they've allowed this to happen. They've allowed a product to go out, knowing surely that this must be what's going on. I'm genuinely speechless about it. It's a huge. We've all been so excited about those cameras. They were announced months and months ago without a specific date. So it wasn't like they were working to a date that they'd said it's going to be on the, whatever it was, the 14th of July, we're releasing this camera. That's it. They had time to sort this out. They could have eked it out if there were issues going on. I just cannot fathom the logic. And then Sony, like you say, it's not got quite the same level of real glitz in terms of stuff like the 8K headliney stuff. But it's doing the stuff that all of us want. The 8K, none of us were after that at all. It does all the stuff we want. It does it well. It doesn't overheat. It just seems to be just a sort of perfect iteration of all that stuff, all those specs that we want to be using. And I just don't see where Canon's left in all of this. It's a really, and for someone like me who's really invested in Canon in terms of glass, I don't really want to buy those cameras. I mean, maybe the 6 still, because once people, some more reviews come out and we see how that's doing, that's maybe usable. But the 5, I just don't see where that sits at all. I just don't see what the market is for that with this. It's interesting. It's a really gobsmacking situation. I'm very surprised about it, to be honest.
Is there, if you put your thinking cap on and you look at the camera, is there a way that without changing something drastically in the camera that Canon can do to help resolve those issues? I mean, are there ways that they can do that? I don't know. I'm just asking. I'm throwing that out there.
I've put it into Google a lot this last few days. What can Canon do to rectify this situation? Right. And you've got people like Tilter who built this cage that have got this fan on the back of it. But when you see a lot of the reviews that people who are kind of genuinely independent from Canon have been doing on this camera and going, this thing's overheating really quickly. And I'm not talking about just the 5. The 6 is doing this as well. And people are putting them in the refrigerator. People are putting ice packs on these things. And they're still locked up for 10 solid minutes.
I've seen leaf blowers used.
Right. Well, even on Johnny's thing with the R6, he's saying that he took the lens off and put a fan into the sensor to cool the thing down. Now, this is stuff that we do not do because, for obvious reasons, this is going to blow all kinds of nastiness in there. But I just cannot imagine what you could fix with firmware unless you're starting to really change the data rates of the codecs that you're using, which are just, you're then taking away the USPs of the camera.
Yeah.
Or you're looking at hardware solutions for cooling, which are going to inevitably cause issues, whether it be noise from fans, cooling, having to power something that's going to be a cooling solution. If that's and then this adapter, this lens adapter, which is only then going to be effective for using EF glass, not for the new
which
set
is
of
a super
glass.
not Canon move again.
Exactly, because you're then taking away the market for the new glass, and they're trying to get everyone into the new system. It just seems that I can't. There must be some very, very unhappy people in Canon this week, but I can't see. I just don't understand why they've let this camera be released, or these 2 cameras be released with this issue still so clearly a problem. Because they released a press release before the camera came out about the overheating issues, like the day before. Was it the day before or 2 days before? It's just nonsense. And then Sony have ticked every box with it. It's everything we all wanted, and more, I would say. And it really pains me to say it, because having gone from Canon to Sony and now back to Canon, God, I should have stayed with the mistress and not gone back to the Canon wife.
Wow. Now we got some pub talk here. Interesting.
Interesting. You brought up, like, is there anything they can do? And I don't think they will, but the only option for them, without like recalling and rebuilding the camera, which they're not going to do, is to limit what you can do in the camera. So, for instance, traditionally on Canon cameras, you have like all these limitations, right? Like once you hit record, you can't like zoom in on the image. You can't change certain focus things. They could do that stuff to take pressure off the processor, but I mean, there's really not going to be a solution aside from it's just there's too much heat. Their processor is inefficient. Sony's just better at that and always has been. And you just got to get the heat out. Like even that Tilta thing, that's all external outside of the camera. The heat is all inside of the camera. So even if you add fans, ice, everything, you're not going to get the heat out. You have to literally open up the hole in the camera somehow.
It's a sealed camera. I mean, not completely, but the whole idea is it's weather sealed, which is one of the things that for a stills photographer who's traveling around the world, with a 45 megapixel camera, it might be great. This is a lower cost option to the 1DX Mark III for sure, and in a smaller camera body, and it puts you into the RF lens system. So I think there's an argument there for a stills photographer. It's again, I want to get the camera in my hands and I want to try it and I want to see where it's effective. They do have an overheat protection mechanism in there. Obviously, it's not doing from what we can tell, as much as it can be doing. But maybe Caleb, maybe Ben, there's a way for them to tune that where it does certain things that, like you were saying, Caleb, locks you out. So there's another level of protection that gets put into there, which does deactivate certain functionality, but gives you the ability for longer record times. Like, and then do we know how effective it is if you're going external to an external recorder? Again, not necessarily my preference, but any...
Definitely less heat issues, because you're no longer like having to compress the footage in camera, if you will. So definitely it's going to be easier on the camera if you go that route. And speaking of the overheating and what you just said, maybe Canon's being too conservative with that number. Maybe you need to go a little more Sony. You know what I mean? Like maybe they're like, all right, the camera's going to melt and explode after an hour of filming. Yep. We don't even want to come close to that, so we're going to cap it way down here to keep it safe and make the camera last longer. Maybe they could pull a Sony where like you can set it to high, or something. Yeah. And Matty Hapoya on YouTube made a great point. Like he just wished they had just said or limited the camera, like in 8K you only get 10 minutes burst, or 5-minute bursts. I think that would have been. I think a lot of people have been like, oh, it's fine.
But that was what I was getting at, that no one was expecting or wanted particularly 8K, and a nice little thing to have. It's the problem with the 4K modes. That's the issue.
Yeah.
That's just the stuff. That
but maybe they should have never, created a subsampled 4K image from 8K. Maybe it should have just been a 4K camera. But again, it's this weird hybrid if you really think about what the camera is, because you're already starting with a 45 megapixel camera, right? So you're the size of your sensors, as Atomos likes to call them, which is fine. Those pixels is really, really small. And if you take a look at the A7S III, we're talking about a 12 megapixel camera. 45 megapixel, 12 megapixel. There's a huge difference there. We also don't know a lot about the Sony cooling system, which somebody's asking about, but obviously it's very efficient. They're basically, they're deriving that 4K image from that 12 megapixel sensor, but they're not giving you, a higher resolution. They're not giving you even a 5 or 6K resolution option there. So they've kind of dialed in, at least in this camera, from what I can see, a very video-centric, camera. It's also a brand new sensor, and as Caleb said, so is the R5. But if we're talking about any company in the world that knows how to design and build sensors, it's Sony. That is their game. And there's so many Sony sensors and so many products that you don't even know are Sony sensors, that they are really the sensor king when it comes to that. So there's probably a lot of efficiency inside of this, and we can't argue that even if you're going to go the Canon route, which I still think a lot of people will for different reasons, that there's no question that there's no camera on the market, probably even in a larger format that I know of, that's going to do better in low light than the A7S III. I mean, this thing is a monster. Yeah. And if you watch Gerald Undun's video, and I also read another Japanese DP who said the same thing, it seems like this camera is, without being advertised as such, is basically a dual native ISO camera. So we've got, when you hit that 16,000, 400 ISO or ISO, then all of a sudden the image starts to become cleaner again. So there's a weird space there where it gets a little noisy. And then I apologize. Can you guys hear the dogs? I'm going to mute and you guys can talk.
Yeah. Can we hear anything but the dogs? It makes perfect sense when Gerald's video was explaining about the dual ISO. That was kind of fairly incredible, really. And some of the sample footage that I've seen in low light, and Philip Bloom's video again, things kind of clean. It's amazing.
While the dogs get sorted over there, I think there should be a company, if not several companies, maybe Tilt is this company, that offers a service where they take an R5 and figure out how to open it up and get some airflow. Because they've done stuff like that with the Blackmagic camera, where you can send your camera in and it comes back with a flippy screen. That's a little different because they're not altering the camera, which I feel like you'd have to do something pretty serious with the R5. But I could see, for another $500 to $1,000, there's a semi-solution that would turn into something.
It's an interesting.
Yeah, it's all still like very upsetting. What do you think about this, Jem? You're playing things pretty.
I think my mother and father-in-law are here, and their little shitty dog is here making a lot of noise. And my dog doesn't bark all the time, but as soon as this little yappy gets going, all hell breaks loose. I don't know. I would really love it if Canon considered an option here where they're looking at the market and they said, we know that we've designed this camera. What we're going to do is, I don't know how they handle this because it's not going to be a recall, right? And we really need to get these cameras in our hands and like really put them through their paces. And I'm going to go upstairs to my barn and do that. I am going to create content in and around these cameras, probably some educational content. So that'll be educational. It's not to defend or to do anything having to do with it. It's just, here's the camera, here's how you use it, these are the modes. Let's be realistic about it. But it would be great if there was a video version of this. Like, I would forego weather sealing to a degree on this camera if I could record for longer periods of time, because it's a rockstar camera except for the overheating issue, right? That if we boil it down to anything here, it's a rockstar camera, and they've done something so uncanon, which is they've always protected. Let's be honest, there's always been a reason why Canon has done what they've done. They've done it for two reasons. Number one, they've done it because they want to protect some of their higher end cameras. But number two, they've actually done it because they know that if they put certain things into the camera and give you access to it, that it's going to be bullshit. Like, let's be honest, it was bullshit in the A7 series when they put S-Log 3 and S-Gamut 3.Cine into the first iteration, second iteration of the camera. We've talked about this before. You get the little asterisks, and it's like, you're not really shooting in S-Gamut 3.Cine. You are now, probably, on the A7S III with these higher data rates, but you weren't in the previous cameras. And Canon didn't say, we're going to give you a 5D Mark IV, and we're going to go ahead and put Canon Log 3 in there, and we're going to go ahead and give you a wide gamut option, because they knew at 8-bit it was just going to go to dog poo. That's the reality. So,
but that's exactly the weird thing, is in terms of Canon's mentality until very recently has always been, we kind of under-deliver in terms of spec. And you remember when the C300 Mark I came out, and there was a whole plethora of stuff that came out at the same time, and Canon's was just the spec was so low, it was all hyped up at the time, and then the spec came and it was that's so disappointing. But it was done so well, it was implemented so beautifully, even though it was a low spec, and that's always been Canon's thing. They've always been slightly not at the bleeding edge of technology, not pushing things forward, in our opinion, I suppose. But what they have done has always been implemented beautifully. And that's the surprise. That's why it's kind of so shocking to me.
Sure. Yeah, the 7D, remember?
Just gone, let's just reach for the stars, and crashed and burned.
Well, the last time we had this issue was the 7D from Canon. If you really look at it, the 7D was sort of the overheating, problem camera for Canon. And the reality is, to this day, and Canon is not the only company that's guilty as charged, is get the effing cameras in the hands of real shooters early and have them tell you from day one what the problem is with the camera. Because if you're going to design a camera system to be used in a certain way, you need to get that feedback. Now, I'm hoping there's an option, like you said, Caleb, where they can basically unthrottle the camera a little, or whatever you call it, where they say, we're not going to be as protective. Okay, you're not going to get as many actuations out of this camera in a stills situation. Maybe there's even a warning that, it's going to lower the number of actuations that you're going to get, though that would be a little disconcerting. But it's basically, look, we know that these cameras are probably going to last unless you get a lemon. for as long as we're going to use the camera anyway. So far, historically, most of these DSLRs and mirrorless cameras have not pooped out on us. Once they work and they work reliably, they're not just going to go to nothing, right? So do I expect to be shooting it with an R5 5 years from now? Probably not. So if I'm going to get a good 3 years out of the camera system, but I can push and it's heating up a little bit more inside and it gets a little bit warm, I might take that. So I don't know. That's kind of what I'm thinking. What else do we think about this? Because inevitably we're comparing it to another camera because that camera was released so recently. But what is it, what is it that we're really liking about this? To me, it looks like we're getting the higher data rates that we were looking for. I'm still not totally clear how we tune those in, but it looks like we're at 200 megabits per second in certain modes. We're slightly higher than that.
In others.
And 260 or something when we're going 120, which is good. They're giving you a higher data rate when you're going higher frame rate, which is correct.
Yeah, excellent.
And then there's intra, and then there's H.264, there's H.265 options. Again, I will say that we're optimistic and excited about this, and it has been in people's hands, but we have to be realistic about the fact that there's no perfect camera, and I've seen people saying this is the perfect camera. Screw you, there's no perfect camera. There will be things about this camera that will break. It's not going to be 100%, And they've also done some things or not done certain things, which I think, other companies have done so well. And Panasonic is sort of the poster child of this, which is putting video-centric features directly inside of their camera. And it would have been nice if we had some exposure tools and some other things internally with the camera. That would have been great. And you can say the same thing for Canon as well. You can say the same thing for Fujifilm. They don't necessarily put in scopes and some of those other features inside of the camera. So what are your thoughts, everybody? And let's bring the chat into this as well in terms of some things that are there any things that you don't like about what you're seeing with the camera at all right now?
Honestly, there's nothing I don't like. If you look at everything, you look at the footage, and I encourage you, if you haven't already, chat, or even you guys, if you haven't seen Potato Jet's video, watch that. Okay. It's kind of vloggy, but there's some stuff in there that really shows off what's different about this camera. He compares it to Sony's previous cameras, and just color-wise, man, is it different. And it looks really, really good. So that's a great video to check out for kind of a comparison between Canon, Sony A7S III, and the previous gen Sony cameras. There's nothing. It's $3,500. It's full frame, doesn't overheat, unlimited recording, 4K 120.
Yeah.
New color science, higher data rate, incredible autofocus. I think the argument that, just from my personal experience, I think the argument that Canon has the best autofocus, that's pretty much done at this point. They're on par with each other.
Sure.
And, like, Ben, when you switched to Sony, the lens landscape was rough for Sony back then.
Yeah.
Now, you can buy a 24, 35, I'm sure I'm missing some primes, and they have like two flavors. They have the G Master and the they're kind of like more affordable, both of which are like great. So it's getting interesting. Sigma now has a ton of options for them. Sigma announced that they're going to start releasing native E-mount. So no longer are they just slapping and stapling on an adapter, essentially.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But they're going to come out with more and more lenses like that. So I don't know if Canon can come out with like like we've talked about, Jem, a billion times, something in between the cinema, take a little bit of the cooling tech from their cinema cameras, because they know how to do this, right?
Yep.
I mean, are these two different departments? I would imagine. But if somebody just sends a couple emails, and they just came out with like a, I don't know, RC6 or RC5
Or R5V
essentially the same
for video.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, something. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Charge another $500 or whatever. Hack a bunch of
Yeah.
stuff. But
Make
that
it
would
this
be
much thicker.
it.
I don't care. Put some cooling in it.
No one cares. Put a fan in there, you know. Just cut a couple holes in it, and you'll be good to go.
Well, I have a question. If they took the we don't know how capable the sensor is between the R6 and the R5 based on capturing video. We do know that the R6 also borrows a lot from the 1DX Mark III. So the question is, could you take that sensor and could you derive and build a 4K camera that's not as weather sealed as the R5, slot it between those two cameras somehow, and not do what you're saying, Caleb, which is charge more money for it, but have a camera that is really tuned for long recording times and, really truly for 4K, delivery. Because to me, as a video person, the R5 is really interesting for the video that it has in it and the video features it has in it. But I would be really happy with a 20 megapixel camera that my 4K image is coming from. And I wouldn't really miss the fact that I could, that I wouldn't be able to shoot at higher resolutions. So, yeah.
Well, and the R6 has the same sensor, right, as the R5?
No,
The
I
same.
don't think so.
No, I don't think so. I think the R5 is a brand new sensor, and I believe, and I may be wrong here, that the R6 is essentially 1DX Mark III technology.
That's what I think.
But does that really matter? I mean, if you're cooling the system the right way, why couldn't you get a great 4K image? Why couldn't you do some things like they're doing with this HQ mode? I don't know. Maybe the secret sauce for that R5 sensor is the fact that it's deriving it from that 8K. And there's something about that which is, and again, when you look at the comparisons, again, take the overheating situation out of the fold, there is a visible, not an amazingly different, but a visible difference between the fine HQ mode on the R5 and the standard 4K recording on the A7S III, but arguably both are fantastic. And then from what I'm seeing, the normal 4K recording off of the R5 without the fine HQ mode is slightly softer. Not soft, but slightly softer than what you're seeing from the A7S III natively. So I don't know. It's really hard to kind of sort all that stuff out, especially when you're looking at all of this stuff as compressed video online, and you don't really know exactly what the shooting scenario was. You don't know exactly whether or not people had absolutely tack sharp focus like across the boards, right? There's always room for user error here. So that kind of stuff, again, taking the heating issue out of the equation is sometimes hard to determine on both sides in terms of which one is better and which image is better. I have seen some things where people have used the same exact glass, so hopefully they're just like nailing it in terms of focus in order to show us what they're seeing. Feelings on that?
Ben?
Anybody?
Anything
Ben? What you got? Anything, Ben? Stay with us.
I'm with you.
Mm-hmm. I know.
I don't know if anything else to add on that. It's
maybe he was checking prices of he could get for his Canon glass on eBay while you were talking.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
That's what I do. Yeah. I don't know. I apparently someone in the comments has just been mentioning that apparently Canon are going to address the overheating issue tomorrow.
I looked for that and I couldn't find it. So hit us with a link.
And if they do, I would love to follow up next week regarding that. Larry says Sony has two processors. Are they splitting the load to reduce heat? I don't know. Interesting.
Another thing we should bring up, we've been talking about A7S versus R5.
Yeah.
This is only like fist and glove number one from Sony. The other one is going to come soon, and that's going to be the A7 IV, which is due soon. So I mean, if they can deliver, not as much low light, obviously, it's going to be a 20-ish megapixel sensor. But if they do 4K 60, no 120,
yeah,
not as good low light,
yep,
same color science,
yep,
and maybe pluck a couple high-end features out of there.
Well, they might take the recording times out. They might go for
Sony's kind of done with that though. Like the A6600, no record limits. They're kind of over the record limit thing, and they're getting the heat dialed in.
Why do you think that is? Because we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago about this whole thing that the EU had the limit of the 30 minutes, and that was this whole thing to do with tax.
The law is over, right?
Yeah. So why have Canon still? I mean, obviously it's now probably something to do with this overheating thing, and that's why they're capping it at 30 still. But
that could be the conspiracy theories. Canon cameras have always overheated after 30 minutes. Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe that's it. It just seemed an odd thing that all of a sudden Sony have said this is completely open. There is absolutely no limits to anything.
Or maybe that's Canon's still to die on. And that's their last stand against people not buying a cinema camera.
Maybe. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
I don't know if they thought that far into it. Maybe I'm wrong. I also have seen a lot of comments here and also online about people who are doing tests where they're shooting stills, for a period of time, and then they're switching over to shoot video. I'm not saying that doesn't happen because this is a hybrid camera, but I don't know if that's actually a great test in terms of talking about what is generally happening on a day-to-day basis in the real world. If I'm going out with a camera system, even if it's a hybrid in this form factor, I'm probably not thinking that I'm going to go out and shoot 800 still photographs and then switch over and then try to shoot a whole bunch of video. It happens. But yeah.
Well, I think people like real estate people, I think they do that an awful lot. There's a lot of people that do that are doing both wearing both hats simultaneously.
Interesting.
And that seems a bizarre thing as well to me, that if you're doing stills, that the thing's still overheating. I mean,
I guess let's think about that. If you're shooting bursts at 45 megapixels in RAW, then that's doing a lot. That's making the camera work pretty hard as well. It's not a justification. Okay. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying I can see how that could occur.
So that could occur in a kind of sports scenario, and I don't know the exact circumstances, but I know that Gerald had also been talking about, I don't think it was in his review, but maybe it was on some of the social media posts that I'd seen this week, that he was saying that also he'd been shooting stills with it, and I can't imagine that it was that insane sort of high frame rate stuff.
Yeah.
And it was also still locking up and not allowing him to do video without a period of rest between.
I think in his R5 video, he did say he went out and took photos and then switched to video mode, and it was already showing the warning, just switching from stills to video. But I can't recall.
So what do we have up in the chat? Have you guys seen any comments that we can pull out of here, and start to talk about? Or
can you please address the idea of shooting 4K externally on the R6? Yes, it's going to massively help. A lot of people are saying they're getting over an hour on the R6 recording externally. So that is one solution. It obviously, requires an external battery and then this whole thing, but that is an option.
Yep. Yeah.
I think the cameras are done for weddings. Someone mentioned weddings in here, and that's not going to cut it. Being outside, filming a wedding, can you imagine the warning signal turns on, the kiss is 15 minutes out.
So I mean, I do think if we're talking about wedding people, I think it really depends. I think that if you're going to go R6, you're going to get obviously higher megapixel. If you're using it as a true hybrid camera, and again, this goes to what you were saying, Caleb, with the A7 IV and when that comes out. But when you're looking at a true hybrid camera, then people are probably going to be looking for a 20 plus megapixel in terms of stills. generally, and they're going to want the video performance to be good. So I think in a lot of ways the R6 is going to be the more interesting camera for people who are looking at Canon. They're still going to get great looking video out of that camera if they have good lenses. There's no question about that. And if they can open that camera up to Canon Log 3, if they can, increase some of the other options there, even if they say, oh, if you are recording to an external monitor, you're going to lose your internal monitor, which is actually something that happens in one mode on the A7S III. Isn't that correct? Because I did see something where if you want to push something to both monitors, there is one mode where you can lose your built-in screen, and then you don't have touch focus when you're using the A7S III. So that's at least one thing that I'm aware of that basically can occur with that. So maybe Canon does something similar, but they tweak it. And it would be great if they address this tomorrow. We'll have to see if that actually happens. Can you guys do a lighting stream comparing cheap light alternatives to expensive ones? It's called DSLR Video Shooter. Well, to expensive ones, I guess you have to watch you watch Caleb's channel and then watch Tommy's channel, I guess, and then you'll just have to compare what is happening.
Tommy's.
Here we go. Yeah, Tommy's all about that. Come on, Igor's coming in. $5. Thank you, sir. Funny. Shout out from Canon R5, unfriendly, hot and humid Illinois. Very, very nice. Thank you, sir, for that. It is very much appreciated. I will maybe have a shot of vodka for that $5. Just saying. Maybe
dude, Igor. I know that guy. I've worked with that guy. He's great.
Illinois.
Thanks, Igor.
Awesome.
Thanks for swinging by.
Thank you. Yeah.
He lives very nearby. Good to see you, dude.
That's awesome. Good. Getting some lighting chatter here. Oh boy, I don't know what's going on over there. Somebody came in. The comments are getting a little, as they do sometimes near the end, they get a little bit ugly on Camera and Flask. Anything else? If you want to do a question, maybe an at the C47. And what else? You guys pull any other comments here?
Let's see here. What do we got? What do you guys think of this whole thing? Is there anyone still going for a Canon camera? I think the R6 has some hope still.
Because
let's be honest,
one
guys,
that was more interesting to me anyway.
I know, we've been giving them a hard time, but it's one thing to come out with a mirrorless camera that also does video, but they've hyped up the video on this a lot, and I think that's why people are upset. It's fine to have a Canon camera that doesn't do great video. That's okay. But I think the fact that they've been filmmakers, what dream, ooh, here it comes. And it turns out to be this nightmare. You can't push it as a professional tool if it can't even be on, right? It's one thing to have limitations. Yeah. It's another to shut it down.
Let's read this from Archie right here. $5 from Archie. So don't filmmakers have to deal with downtime too? ? 1,000 foot of super 35 millimeter film at 24 frames per second is 11 minutes of footage. Canon R5 for narrative work? ? It's a valid, yes, it's a valid post, especially in a narrative workflow. At the same time, the vast majority of people out there are not shooting on film now. So I think that it has validity to have that conversation, and that there's probably less of an issue. But I think if you're doing narrative work and you feel that an R5, for instance, is the right camera system for you, and it's such a low cost of entry, then you're going to have to think about having multiple bodies, I think. Because I think you can't approach it with the viewpoint that, you're going to have the reliability. And as soon as you get to that point, why are you using that form factor for that type of content? Because you generally will have at least two people who who are going to be operating that camera system. Generally, in narrative work, you're going to have at least a camera operator and an AC. The camera op may also be the DP. So you're probably best off looking for a digital cinema camera and starting to look at that. And it'll be interesting to see what Sony does with the F5 Mark II, because obviously they have an option there where they finally changed the guts of the Alpha series cameras, finally. Because if you look at the FS7 series cameras, they were sort of their own unique camera system, which has grown up into the FX9. But the FS5 and FS5 Mark II were these weird hybrids where you took the FS7 design and shrunk it, but you really had the innards of the A7S series camera. So it was an 8-bit camera, 100 megabits per second, all of that. So there's a really interesting place that Sony can now go, which puts it into a really interesting space in the digital cinema space, where they can say FS5 Mark III, or whatever they call that camera, now has the innards of the A7S III. That's really interesting. But you're going to get the variable ND filter, you're going to get XLR inputs, you're going to get raw out of the camera, which of course we have in the A7S III as well. Kind of bonkers. The FS5 Mark III, or whatever they call it, could be a really interesting camera in the digital cinema camera space. And if they brought that camera in the, which they really could, in the $5,500 to $6,500 price range, and sit that below the FX9, that could be pretty bonkers. I mean, that would be a camera that I think a lot of people would get down with now, because we're talking high data rates, we're talking 10-bit 422, better color science. I'm over this A7S III thing, and now I'm starting to get excited about that camera. Screw the A7S III, and that would be a really interesting camera in the space. Anybody have thoughts on that? I mean, that to me, I haven't even thought about that. I feel like an idiot for not even thinking about it. Yeah.
And I also, to play off of that, I can't wait for us to reach that level, because it's coming at some point when it's no longer you go mirrorless for full frame, you go cinema camera for Super 35. We're starting to see that transition, but at some point we're going to have the FS5 C200E full frame.
Yep.
Like, I don't have any information, and I hope this camera comes out at some point, but like if they did an EVA full frame, like I could see Sony or Panasonic being the first to do that. Yeah. And what if it's a 6K, 8K camera full frame, but they offer a Super 35 crop with 4K? Yeah. Or something where you get this really nice transition. Because, I mean, you look at the cinema world, it's transitioning to full frame for sure. Right?
Yeah.
I think manufacturers and everything.
I think Clay is calling it right here, the FX5. It makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. That's the next camera for Sony. You've got the FX9. I mean, they could have done FX7 actually, to be honest with you, and then done FX5. But FX5 makes total sense. I'll remember that you said that, Clay. I think, depending on. But I think that makes total sense, and that's the first full frame digital cinema camera that they're coming in at under $7,500. Which really makes for a very interesting space. I mean, if they came out with an FX5 that had the A7S III features, I think we're talking about a camera that would be wildly popular in the market. Because that body, if it's as small as the FS5 Mark II, is small enough to put on gimbals. Even a Weeble style or Crane S style gimbals. For sure, with at least that second handle on the back. I think you could absolutely do that. If you look at the Crane 3S, I mean, that's kind of like a perfect marriage with something like an FS5 style body, because it's light enough still, and I think that would be pretty exciting for the market as well. But I think these are all great. We're winning here across the boards, and I would like to get my hands on all of these cameras and really put them through their paces. Any final words here from people in the chat, and from you, Ben, and from Caleb as we wind this down?
Crazy times, man. I mean, we're like over here complaining about Canon and gaga about the Sony stuff, but what a great time to be in this space. It's ridiculous. And we're not even done yet. Like, a company that rhymes with Santa Phonic.
Ridiculous.
I mean, we haven't seen too much, right?
Yeah.
When was the S1H?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Anyway, there's
Yeah.
a lot going on. You know, Sigma's making cameras. It's just ridiculous. So, yeah, it's been a wild last couple weeks for sure, and it's just going to get crazier, I think, as we progress more and more into and as video gains popularity, if you will, because it used to be like mostly stills, but I mean, this whole YouTube thing is kind of changing the world, especially now that we're all trapped and video is our main communication.
Yep.
I wouldn't be surprised if we just see more and more of this stuff. Like at some point, this is going to be like all year round. It's going to be like it is right now.
Yep.
It's going to be ridiculous.
Ben?
Yeah. And I just think it's amazing how much the world, this world, not the world, but this kind of the camera world has shifted since the last show 1 week ago, when we were all very excited about Canon. We all thought that was amazing. Slightly skeptical to a degree, I suppose, about what Sony were going to come up with. And 7 days later, everything's on its head. It's amazing. It's very difficult to comprehend how much that's all changed. Sony have done an amazing job. I don't think there's anything else they could have put into that camera to make us any happier than we are with it. I just feel like I've backed the wrong horse somewhat from what's gone on recently. But it's amazing, as Caleb says. It's very exciting. The way everything's pushing forward and these amazing tools that we're getting at very affordable prices. So, interesting. And I'm really desperate to see what Canon do to address this, because they have to do something. There's no way they can just let this lie and this to go on. They have to sort this out. I mean, these are premium cameras at fairly high-end prices, particularly the 5. They can't let this slide. But I have no idea what they can possibly do to put this back in its box. But
well,
exciting.
With that, a couple of last things. Number one, don't forget that the technology that we're seeing in the R5, like the technology in the A7S III, can go upstream, and we can see that technology moving into a camera like a C200 body, which would be super exciting. Obviously, you have to be careful in terms of how far they go, and maybe, I don't know, we'll see that. The same with the S1H. And we'll see where everybody goes with their next round of digital cinema cameras. And lastly, a huge thank you to David Carroll with a super chat of, what are you, crazy, you MFer, in a good way? $24.99. Still waiting for JVC. Love that little 300 monstrosity, by the way. What a strange thing with that MFT mount and the super 35mm sensor.
Brilliant.
P.S. Get the barn done. With that, gentlemen, love you guys. Love everybody who comes to the chat and is part of this every week. We're going to end this thing right now. Next week, we may be following up, especially if Canon comes out with some data about this overheating issue. If not, Caleb, get your thinking cap on, because you're the host next week, and we've got to come up with a topic and a description. Everybody is awesome for being part of this, and we'll see you next week here on this channel with another episode of Camera and Flask. And, bye for now. Have a drink and enjoy yourself. What just happened? What? Is there another one? Is there another one? Wait, I saw... Where is it?
Another one.
Hasn't shown up. Oh, are you kidding? What is Archie?
Archie.
Oh, come on. Coming in with a double super chat. Can you do a product review of external recording that can take advantage of the HDMI raw output from Canon and Sony? I would absolutely happily do that if I can get my hands on the cameras, for sure. And of course, with the Sony, we should be doing that. We're not going to get HDMI raw recording out of the Canon. That's not going to be an option, at least with these cameras. But we could do it with the A7S III if we can get that in house. Might have to send some emails out to the people at Sony. We'll see. But I will also talk about.
You can always pick yourself up a Nikon Go with that Z6.
You still have yours? Ridiculous.
Oh, that's an actual joke.
I know. Still waiting for the 4K Ninja Star, and it would come in handy right now, just so that you know, people. I hope you're listening, Atomos. It's still a product that we want. All the best. Thanks, everybody, for the super chats. Thank you, Caleb. Thank you, Ben, for everything. I hope you gentlemen have a good rest of the week. And to everybody out there, stay safe. Take care of your friends and family, and eat some good food in the meantime. All the best, everybody.